What's the best piece of advice you've ever received in real estate?
Wow, wow. So when I got my license in 2007, an agent who I was working with, who was mentoring me, she shared this piece of advice. It was not only, I think, the first piece of advice, but it also turned out to be the best piece of advice. And her name was Garnett. And remember, I'll never forget this. Garnett told me, she says, Dan, never, ever, 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 ever leave an appointment without the next appointment set. You take out a buyer, you show them homes, and then you say, okay, what's next? And they say, I'll call you next week. Oh, great. You'll call me next week. What day? Oh, maybe Tuesday. Okay, great. If I don't hear from you on Tuesday, I'll give you a call at Wednesday. Does that sound good? Yeah. Should I call you on Wednesday in the afternoon or morning? Call me in the afternoon. Okay, 3 o'clock. That sound good. Boom, done. So I know I went through that fast, right? But that would be the best piece of advice is to you never, ever, ever do you leave an appointment, a conversation without a specific time scheduled for you to follow up with that person.
I could not be more of a fan of that particular piece of advice. I deploy that in my own life in all sorts of different ways, including because of my horrible memory. The doctor's appointments I go to with the annual doctor's appointments. So I have,
Sure.
various specialists or whatever. I do not leave that room before, or the office before scheduling the next year's thing, because I will not remember 1 year from today. I won't remember a week from today for my work appointments. I certainly won't remember a year from today. That is a great piece of advice. Do not leave the scene of an appointment before scheduling the next appointment. Worst piece of advice you've ever received in real estate?
I'm going to say it pretty general. So I know it was specific where maybe it was like a series of advice or I was following more than one direction. And so there's been times throughout my career where I would follow multiple paths simultaneously. And so I don't know if that was something necessarily that like one person said to me, Dan, you should do 18 different things. But it was probably more like 18 different people said to me one thing and I followed all of their advice. And it left me in a place of overwhelm, distraction, inefficiency, and tiredness. So following more than one strategy at a time would be, I think, bad advice.
Jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing.
That's right.
Yeah, much to my chagrin, I can only handle about one thing at a time.
I always say like do one thing until it's 80% done and then hand it off to somebody else or a system. And
Oh,
then once you're able to do that, then you're able to, take on the next task. But it's got to be at least 80% done before you move on.
this is why we have Dan on the show. Dan Rochon is our guest today. He is the creator of the Teach to Sell system and founder of the CPI community. After going from broke and stuck to building a consistently profitable real estate business, Dan has helped hundreds of agents and entrepreneurs achieve no broke months by mastering influence, neurolinguistic programming, and story-driven sales. Dan, first of all, I want everybody to visit Dan's website, which is nobrokemonths.com. You can learn about all things Dan. He's a coach, he's an author, he's got a book coming out, and it's called Teach to Sell, published by Simon and Schuster. That is a huge feather in Dan's cap. That Simon and Schuster is at the very, very top of the literary publishing field. So this is a big deal. Dan is a big deal. We're happy to have him on the show. Dan, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate the welcome.
Appreciate you being here. Let's start at the beginning. Before you became the Dan that we're about to learn, want to learn how you came to get into real estate. So tell us that story.
Sure. So 2005, I was waiting tables at one of the top real estate. Where am I going with this? At one of the top steakhouses in the entire planet, and I was waiting tables there, and I was making a ton of money. It was a really well-known establishment, one that all the celebrities would come to. It was in Washington D.C. and I'm talking senators and lobbyists and presidents and movie stars and athletes and it was great, but I freaking hated my job. Like
Hmm.
I didn't like doing it. And, I was at the time around 30 years old or so. I was also simultaneously struggling with with my alcohol addiction. And, alcohol had become an escape for me around the age of 13 until it became a cage around, the age of 32. And that's when, I met my friend Dave, and Dave, he didn't, try to, talk me into something. He didn't make me wrong. He listened, he connected with me, he asked me questions, and he helped me to be able to, choose a better life. And, as a result of that, I became sober, and I'm really grateful for Dave for that. And the unfortunate piece of that story was a couple years later, Dave, he died, as a result of his addiction. And, he was able to, help me, and unfortunately wasn't able to help himself. And, I'm forever grateful for that relationship, and, regretful I wasn't able to, help him in return. But nonetheless, I was at that place in my life where I was sort of at a crossroads of, what do I do?
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew I wanted to help people solve their problems, achieve their goals, but I was waiting tables. I didn't know how. And one day, when my buddy said to me, "Hey, Rochon, have you ever considered, real estate sales?" And I hadn't at the time. I had done some investing, some fix and flips, some wholesales, all kinds of different, crazy stuff. And I said, "Yeah, let me check this out." And I found out that it was a 60-hour coursework. It was a few $1,000s to get started. And, and there was no upper limits of it. It was just, based off of, whatever you're going to put into this is what you're going to get out of it. So it seemed to me like a pathway to be able to become an entrepreneur, to become a salesperson, and to really create and design my own life. And that's how I got started.
Wow, what a story. What a story. So yeah, Dan, appreciate you sharing, being vulnerable, and talking about some of the missteps along the way, or the challenges. We all have them. And I have always been so impressed throughout my life when I see people go from addiction to sobriety. It is a marvelous transformation. Almost everybody, if they follow the path as it is laid out before them, turns into just a wonderful human being. It is just incredible, and they become more productive. And you obviously are a shining example of that work. So congratulations to you, and all of the success you've had since. So let's talk a little bit about, you got into real estate. So you were already working at the sort of highest part of the highest peak of the mountain as a server
Sure.
in
Yeah.
Washington. This is a high end steakhouse. This is not, um, you know, an easy gig to get. So you knew how to be around people. You knew customer service. You certainly were affable enough. So how did you make that transition into sales?
Well, you're right. And I would say I was definitely a salesperson as a waiter. And I look at that as my training. I looked at that as my training in regards to how to be able to manage multiple things simultaneously, and to be able to sort of process, in real estate sales, there's, if you do enough volume, there's always pieces that are moving around. There's always challenges. There's, different timelines. You got prospects in one hand, you got clients in the other hand, you've got, aftercare, and there's so many different moving parts. But I would say that it was really, for me, it was understanding that what I learned as a waiter, working with, there was one day I was waiting on 4 tables, and in one of the tables I had Eli Manning, Arch Manning, a Washington Redskins at the time trainer, and I think it was like Arch Manning's wife. So Arch would be, you may have heard of like Archie Manning, who's like
Sure.
the guy. This would be his grandfather.
Wow.
And so, all right, so that's in one table. Another table, I had John Kerry, who was Secretary of State, and also a United States Senator. And in the other table, I had, I forget his name, but he was a Supreme Court Justice. At the same time, I have a fourth table, and these tables are in banquettes, so they're back to back to back. And so I'm in the four table. There was these three guys, and two of them were giving me a hard time. And I'll never remember this. I'll never forget this. Rather, these guys are giving me a hard time, and they're saying nobody famous ever comes in here. Exactly right. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, no sweat, no sweat. And if you don't know who the Mannings are, they are football players. Just clue your listeners in on that. And so, anyways, the point being is, I learned, by working with these celebrities on a regular basis, that human beings are spiritual beings manifested in this human condition, and it doesn't matter if you're at that level of celebrity, or if you're at the place of, I'd be walking to my car at the end of the night, and I'm, giving, some homeless people the bread from the bread warmer, because it would go stale, and I would take a bag of it and give it to them on my way home or my way to the car. What I realized is that as spiritual beings, no matter where we are in life, we all want the same things. And we want to be loved. We want to be cared for. We want to feel that we're worthy. And we want to be able to have relationship and happiness. And so as I recognized that in that realm, and then I became a real estate salesperson, to go back to your questions, like, how'd you make the transition? Well, it wasn't really such a transition. It was, there's a new tactics that I had to learn. There's new techniques. There's new things I had to learn. I had to learn the technical things of real estate sales, but ultimately understanding who we are and understanding what's important to us and what's vital to us. Again, whether if you're a United States Senator or Supreme Court Justice or a football star, whoever, we all want the same thing. And if you go back to sales, it's, sales isn't about pushing. Sales is about leading. And if you're struggling in sales, you're probably doing it wrong. Right. So when I took on the knowledge to say, my job as a sales professional isn't to push things onto people. It is to be in rapport with them, connect with them energetically. It's to ask them adept questions to deeply understand what their desires are, and not just the technical stuff, but also the emotional stuff. And then it's to actively listen to them at a deep, deep level, not in a place where I'm listening to the words, but in a place where I'm listening to the energy. And so I would say that it was less of a transition from one field to the other, more of a progression of just learning how to be able to navigate through human beings and spiritual beings in one realm into another. And, and that was my experience through it.
Yeah, I love that. I'm hearing a lot of talk about connection. Yeah. So we're talking about communication, connection, and that we want to be around people that we feel connected to, and people feel connected to us, are more likely to want to utilize our services, buy our products, and just spend time with us in relationship, as you said. So what we're really talking about today is not so much specifically about real estate, although that is what we do here, is really talking about what underlies the sort of the deal itself, which is a relationship, which is connection. So I am super interested, Dan, in talking about that with you, because I believe that if you can increase those skills, and obviously you believe this as well because you teach it, if you can increase your abilities to connect with others, you will improve your business. You will get those ancillary rewards. But there are some skills to learn. There are some things that we weren't taught from our parents or from our schools. So I want to get into that. But yeah, let's talk about it. Talk about communication.
Communication is the response that you get. And when you recognize that,
I'm gonna pause because Dan just said something utterly profound. He didn't say communication is one person trying to, give some sort of information to another person. Dan said something really, really smart. And I'm sorry, Dan, I'm pausing you because I know what you said, and what you said, I want all of our listeners to hear. He said communication is the response you get. So what Dan's really saying is communication is your skill level to achieve what you want from the other. It's the feedback loop that you're getting. Dan, thank you for that.
You're welcome. And thank you, DJ, for interrupting me on that. I mean, because it was, or interjecting rather than not interrupting, but thank you for interjecting.
It was an interruption. It's okay.
Yeah, I was like the interrupting cow. It's a bad dad joke, knock, knock.
Yeah. No,
Go on.
yeah.
Who's there? Interrupting cow?
Interrupting cow.
No.
Yeah, right. It's a great one.
You didn't want to go that direction. All right, we'll go back to the communication. Communication is the response that you get. And so what that means is that when you take on the responsibility of the result of the communication, then that puts it on you.
Yeah.
And so it takes away the ability to be able to say, like, a buyer or a seller, for example, like, I remember, and I think they still say it, but buyers are liars, and all these cliches that are just horrible. And it's like, no, when you don't take on the responsibility of the result of your communication, then it allows for you to get lazy and allows for you to have excuses to be ineffective. When you say to yourself, whatever result that I get, I'm responsible for that, then what happens is that you elevate your results extraordinarily.
Yep.
Now, it's easy to say, well, what about the other person? Okay, well, guess what? They're also responsible. But guess what? Between you and the other person, there's only one of them that you have any say in. And that's you. And so that's my definition of communication.
It is a perfect definition. And I love that you really, really walk through that, because that is so important for us to realize that communication isn't our intent, right? So Dan didn't say it's our intention, because oftentimes we intend to communicate something to someone and it doesn't get the result we want. They don't understand. They didn't believe you, or for whatever reason, it didn't get communicated correctly. And we blame them. And Dan would say, okay, well, yes, they have a responsibility to process the information. However, I'm the one that delivered the information. So how do I re-deliver that information? How do I deliver it more elegantly? How do I deliver it in a way that they want to, or a way that they process information, that they want to hear it? So this is what we're talking about. And I know we're getting really granular with communication, but it's so important, because if you can kind of grasp this concept, as Dan said, this exponential growth happens because you will start talking to people in the way they want to be talked to, not the way you want to be talked to.
I love that, DJ. Let me give you the actual, like, the science behind it. And I go and teach in the book, Teach to Sell, Why Top Performers Never Sell and What They Do Instead. I go through this, and it's called the self-coaching model. And what the self-coaching model is if you're not driving right now and you're at home, get out a piece of paper and a pen. And if you could, we're going to draw a clock. And at that noon o'clock, the 12 o'clock position, we're going to write down the word circumstance. All right. So we'll talk about that here for a second. So there's circumstance. Something happens and you observe that circumstance through your five senses.
Mm-hmm.
And then, based off of your education, your background, your experiences in life, you assign meaning to whatever it is that is happening. And then, if you're following along with me, around the 2 o'clock position, write down the word thought. Okay, so the circumstance that you observe through your senses, do you then have a thought about them? And then if you write down around the 5 o'clock position the word feeling, now you're going to have a feeling about it. All right. So now what I just described so far, that's your life. That is your life right there. Now we're going to go a little bit further from this. We're now going to go over to the 7 o'clock position. We're going to write down the word action. And then around the 10 o'clock position that you do the word result. And so I'll go through all this again for you. So you have the circumstance at the noon position. At the 2 o'clock position, you have thought. At the 5 o'clock position, you have feeling. At the 7 o'clock position, you have action. And at the 10 o'clock position, you have result. And then you draw an arrow that's going clockwise between each of those. And what you just did there was you see that you have a closed loop of that's your life. Now, how's that relate to communication? Because if you look at that gap in between the circumstance and the thought, that circumstance is fed from your experiences, from your emotion, from your education, your culture, your background, your upbringing, etc. And then we're going to throw something else on here. You go through some filtering, generalizations, deletions, and distortions. So generalizations, deletions, and distortions are communication styles, which are, get the book, and I explain it to you in the book. It's a little bit more complicated than what I believe I can do it right here. But for the lack of a better term, it's the way that we process, and sometimes we leave pieces out, and sometimes we add pieces. Sometimes we generalize. Like there's a president that will say sometimes everybody agrees with me. Well, that's a broad generalization. Who's everybody? Okay. And I'm not picking on, I'm not going to get into the political stream, right? But any well-crafted politician is effective in that communication to let you believe that they're talking to you and your needs. And they're doing so in a way, they're communicating in a way that they're generalizing so that you can put what you want in there. So anyway, so what I just described to you is the self-coaching model. And I go through that in more depth in the book, but this is how we communicate and how we get results. And since I'm here, and this isn't about communication, but if you want to hack what we just went through, you could do so through feeding your subconscious through things like visualizations, affirmations, reading, relationships, prayer, exercise. And there's different ways that you can program yourself to get out of that closed loop, because what we just did was we did a clock with a closed loop, and that's why we did it like that, to demonstrate to you that that our lives are cyclical, which is why you so often get the same results over and over and over and over again throughout your life.
Yeah, we're talking about breaking patterns, and Dan said it very, very effectively. There was that we have this loop around the way we experience the world, and this loop in his analogy sort of goes via a clock hand, and it goes around, but it goes around without much intention, without much conscious realization. And what Dan teaches you how to do is how to slow down the clock hand so that you can intentionally make decisions around what you feel, what you think, how you react. Because if you are in the driver's seat, you get to decide about how you show up. And that's really important for realtors, right? As you said, Dan, realtors are constantly under just a constant stream of emails, texts, phone calls, things go wrong. There's a constant barrage of information that's coming to them, some that will throw them off their game. And a realtor really needs to be able to be mindful and able to regulate in this way, so that when these situations happen, the client, they might be very reactive, but the realtor now understands, okay, I am going to choose how I respond to this versus this is how I am responding to this. In other words, my default is this, but I may choose a different path. This is the essence of what Dan teaches. It's intention. How do I create intention around my action, my communication, and my skill?
That's right, DJ. And right now, I believe it's more important than ever before, because that influence gap, it's everywhere. It's between leaders and teams. It's between family members. It's in politics. And with artificial intelligence shaping the way that we see the world, what we read, there's so many things that, with artificial intelligence, big data, technology, but AI, it can produce perfect information, but what it can't do is it can't see you. It can't look you in the eyes and know who you are. Technology can produce, incredible information, but it can't cross that human threshold of connectivity. And as the world has changed, and it's changing at a velocity that I cannot even describe, because not too long ago, when I first started being, I've been coaching agents I owned a real estate brokerage for 10 years, and I had 150 agents who worked for me. So I coached agents then, but I started coaching real estate agents around maybe 7 years ago. And when I started coaching agents, I would talk about technology, big data, and AI. And when I got to AI, people were like, oh, yeah, that's the future. Okay. This hasn't been that long. And when you look at the speed of how this stuff's being developed, why your ability to communicate matters today more than ever before is because it's hard today to even distinguish between real and fake.
Yep.
So you've got to be able to master these skills to be able to thrive if you want to survive. And when you do, then you're going to be able to really, to be able to serve at a high level.
Tell us, how do we start that process?
It's about understanding, to be able to start the process is about being able to understand the basic, let me walk you through an exercise. So think about your favorite teacher, your favorite coach, your favorite guide. And if you're listening to this right now, and if you can, close your eyes for a moment, think back, see their face, hear their voice, feel the way that you felt when they believed in you. Now open your eyes and imagine that person walked into your life today and they gave you advice. You'd probably follow it, right?
100%. I feel great right now thinking about that teacher who believed in me.
Yeah, because they earned your trust.
Yep.
So DJ, to answer your question, where do you start? Well, the starting point is just understanding how it feels like if you just did a DJ, and if you're, listening to this on, on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this right now on your podcast, and if you did that as well, then you just had the experience of, hey, I remember Mr. Smith or Miss Bobbitt or whoever the case may be. And I remember how she made me feel. And if she came in the room right now and gave me some advice, I would follow that. Well, that's a demonstration of they didn't teach you algebra or history. They believed in you, right? They were probably there when you were struggling with a challenging relationship, or you're being made fun of at school, or maybe you were in a new school and you had no friends, or whatever the case may be, and they earned your trust. So if we can understand that this is the way that we communicate as levels, that's the starting point. Just have an awareness of it. And now that you have an awareness of it, you can now choose moving forward to say, well, will I be that guide? Will I be that mentor, that coach, that teacher? And however many years ago it was that, from that person that you were, remembering, it was probably a really long time ago. And they made an impact that you remember them today. So now that you understand the power of being able to be, to teach to sell, now that's the starting point. And now you can be able to be able to connect with other people at a full level, right? Because the connection starts when the other person knows that you care and when you listen.
Yeah, let's talk about, thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
Really great. Let's talk about, what do you do? So let's start with, what are some of the practices, the exercises, the behaviors that agents can start doing to really understand by teaching, that is really the pathway to sales?
Yeah. It's not just, so there's a couple different ways here, DJ. So first of all, we use it in our marketing. Secondly, we use it in our client care. Okay, so it's not just to be able to get clients, but it's also to be able to serve clients so that you build a bigger trust with them. Let me give you a specific example for real estate agents specifically. You're working with a buyer. Have you ever had this, Mr. and Mrs. Real Estate Agent, a buyer that went to the home inspection and they came up with 172 things for you to negotiate? Probably happened to you if you're
Sure.
listening to this. If that happened to you, then what do? You try to tell them, hey, this is unreasonable. You try to convince them into understanding, that it's going to make things go really, really bad. You may lose a deal, and it's just going to be, not ideal. Of course, you want to protect their interests, and you want to, be a fiduciary and protect them, of course, right? But
Yep.
there's sometimes where things go like maybe a little bit further than what would be in their best interest.
Yes.
So the way that most agents do is they go through that and then they go and have a conversation with their broker and they say, Mr. and Mrs. Broker, what should I do here? And you're reactive. Why don't we do this differently? Instead, when you're consulting the buyer up front, when you are consulting the buyer, have a conversation that looks something like this. Mr. Buyer, the day that we write an offer that gets accepted, you're going to go home, you're going to toss and turn. You may even have an argument with your spouse. You may be at odds with each other. You're going to have a sleepless night. You're going to be second guessing. You're going to wake up in the morning. Your sister's going to send you a text. He's going to say you're a freaking idiot for buying when the interest rates are where they are right now. Okay. And then 3 days later, you're going to do a home inspection. The home inspector is going to come in. He's going to give you 100 things that are wrong with that home. Now, remember, Mr. Buyer, you're at the place right now where you are emotionally charged. You have some buyer's remorse. You're uncertain about your decisions. You're making a $500,000 purchase. And now somebody's telling you that all this stuff's wrong with this home. Well, remember, Mr. Buyer, if we get to that situation in the process, it's perfectly normal. What I recommend is if that happens is that we protect you, the big ticket items, the things that are going to cost you money, the HVAC, the plumbing, the electrical, etc., that we make certain that those are fixed and that those are in good repair. And the things that may cost you $25 to fix, maybe we don't even pay attention to that. And that window that's frosted, it's frosted today, the day that we're writing the offer that's going to get accepted. It's still going to be frosted on Thursday when we do the home inspection. So if that's something that's of a concern to you, then maybe we should go find a different home because it is what it is. And so when you consult them up front of the predictable problems, that's one example of how you can do so. Now, if that client goes through that experience, how are they looking at you when they go and they have that sleepless night?
Yeah, they go, well, Dan told me this is what
Yeah.
was going to happen.
Yeah.
And Dan really knows his stuff. Oh, I am having some quandary. And Dan told me to not worry about it because the next day we're going to go through this. We're going to figure it out. We're going to determine what's important. And Dan, I will tell you, we're using this example. And if anyone's thinking like, oh, I don't know how useful this would be, it would have been incredibly useful for me when I bought my last condo because I'm in the business. I'm technically a real estate agent. I don't practice, but I have a license. And I was making the largest financial decision of my life, purchasing. And the night before, I wish somebody had said, by the way, the night before, you're going to think I'm making the worst decision I've ever made in my life. By the way, I've bought before, by the way. It's not like this was my
Sure.
first purchase. So I'm really telling on myself. But the truth is, the night before, I almost fell over. I was so scared, and I was so upset with myself, and I was just a miserable person to be around. And I just wish somebody would have been able to guide me through that in advance. Say, hey, DJ, here's what's going to happen the night before. You're going to probably freak out. What Dan said, it was exactly what I experienced. So I love the fact, Dan, that you're teaching people how to cope ahead and how to just predict the future, how to know that this experience is coming so that it doesn't have the same power that it did for me that night.
Yeah, the difference being is the same thing happens. See, I can't change what's going to happen.
Right.
But what I can change is when it does happen, the difference between my client's perception of me being a true professional versus an idiot. Same thing happens. Nothing different happens. The home inspector either way comes and says there's 100 things wrong with this property. But the difference is when you set them up front to expect that this is what's going to happen. Now that trust is gained, and it still doesn't alleviate some of the fear or whatever the case may be, but it makes it feel more natural. And now just imagine how many more transactions you can do, so that instead of being reactive and going to your broker saying, Mr. Broker, what do I do here? And by the way, I learned all these systems when I was the broker, right? I was the broker. And, by Tuesday, I've had, 20 agents come up to me with the same problem. I'm like, maybe there's a better way we can do this. Maybe instead of being reactive and fixing all the problems, maybe we can identify what are all the problems, and whatever the problems are. Now let's consult them up front before we get there. And that's where Teach to Sell was born.
I love that, because buying a home or selling a home is such an emotionally charged decision. It runs the gamut. It preys upon fear and anger and sadness and all of our deepest emotions, and also pricing, right? We have to figure out pricing, and all of it is just, it's heavy stuff. This is heavy, heavy stuff. And we oftentimes forget as real estate professionals just what that emotional load is on the client. And if they don't know it's coming, if they don't know what's ahead of them, they're going to get hit by it, and it's going to be even more powerful. But as Dan said, you can coach them through it. You can actually help them before it happens, and give them guidance about. And also, what it does really is it establishes you as the expert. Because you're like, oh, I know this thing. I've done this a million times. Here's what's going to happen. And, it's funny. I love, every so often I'll go to a restaurant and a waitress will come over and she'll say, it's very rare, but when it happens, I love it. They'll say, now look, when you start looking at the menu, we have a lot of stuff on here. Don't get overwhelmed. If you get overwhelmed, I'm going to guide you through it. Don't worry. And it's very rare when this happens, but I love when it happens. And then I just go, okay, what should I be looking at? Right. So we're talking about a version of that here. So again, all the way back to communication. How do you help people through? Because people can buy a home on their own. Really, they don't really need you to purchase a property. What they need you to do is to help them through all of the ups and downs of the transaction. And so Dan's process with Teach to Sell is about how to effectively communicate in a way that meets their emotional needs, how to more effectively connect with them intimately, so that you have the ability to even understand their thought patterns, the way they interpret the world, and then you can then present solutions specific to the way that they are experiencing reality.
That's right, DJ. And it's about understanding, how other people perceive the world. That goes back to some of the things that I shared with you before. I've got an opportunity advantage in my marketplace that, I'm in the Washington, D.C., I'm in Northern Virginia. And so it is a very diverse marketplace, which means that at any given transaction, that whoever I'm communicating with probably has different upbringing than me, probably looks different than I do, probably has a different education, different culture, different background, different ethnicity, because I'm literally in a melting pot. Now, I love that. And at the same time, it also presents, you got to stay sharp. You've got to be aware, right? You've got to be ready to be able to understand that, that the person who you're communicating with has a very different worldview, or
Sure.
likely has a very different worldview than I do, because they do. They grew up in a different country or
Yep.
a different culture, whatever the case may be.
So what do you do because you're absolutely right. A lot of us find that, we work well with a certain type of client who's most similar to us. And we want to expand that reach to be able to, connect with others that are, more dissimilar. So what should they do to start considering bridging that gap?
Bridging the gap of how to communicate, or how to tell me more about the question.
Yeah. So we were talking about having, clients that are very different from us, right?
Sure.
So and learning about their specific
Yeah.
needs and what their values are. So you're in a situation where you're in Virginia, you have a very diverse population. You have people coming to you that are very different from one another. These are
Yeah.
not homogenous. It's not a homogenous culture. So you have all these different experiences, beliefs, behaviors, perceptions, and expectations. So how do you navigate through that?
Yeah. So one of the things when I went through the CPI communication model earlier, the last part, and remind you, is number one is connect energetically. Number two is to ask adept questions. And number three is to actively listen. So to actively listen means that you're paying attention to their energy, you're paying attention to their spiritual being. And so regardless of what their background, their beliefs, and their, of the way of their being is, we still have commonalities. No matter where you're born in the world, we have commonalities, right? So it's not that hard to sit there and say, "Like, let me be grounded, let me stop, and let me just pay attention. Let me listen. Let me let me observe. Let me connect with who I'm talking with." Because now when I can do that, now I can observe. And now I can also not just observe, but I can find commonalities. All right. So you go back into that client that I mentioned to you, with the buyer and being afraid when you go to bed at night. That's a common language. I don't care where you're born. You're going to be afraid the day that you write that offer that gets accepted and you go home that
Absolutely.
night. I don't care who you are. There's going to be a question. Did I screw this up?
Yep. 100%.
All right. Now it may sound different than did I screw this up, right? But it's going to be the same damn thing. So no matter what that is, the first step to being able to bridge the gap in between differences is to understand we're not that different.
Yeah.
And now that we can understand that we're not that different, then you find the commonalities, and the connection is within the commonalities.
I
So
love that.
instead of letting the differences of culture, backgrounds, ethnicities, race,
Everyone's going to
whatever,
freak out the night before they sign the check.
boom. That's it right there. That's it right there. Now, once
That
you understand that, now you can speak to those desires, those fears, those
yeah.
goals.
Boy, Dan, and what's so important about speaking to those desires, fears, and goals is because the emotion is what's driving the behavior, right? So if we can quell these fears, if we can help them when they're you painted that example of the night before or the day of, and all of these sort of accumulated negative things happening at on top of each other. Well, that is going to have that is going to have a cumulative effect, and that will in fact be much different than if the person was receiving that information on a massage table at the same time, right? So it's it's a lot about state management. And for you, I love the fact that understanding the commonality is so important. So you could say, okay, every buyer goes through this one particular experience or these five particular experiences. I am going to help guide them through these experiences because these are the 5 experiences they're going to remember most, they're going to experience the most, and they're going to need the most help.
And when you do that, now you gain the trust.
Yeah. I love it. Tell us about the book.
So the book took me, I think, maybe 20 years or so to put together, and I started writing it around 5 years ago. And it's a journey of understanding, that the reader of the book is the hero of the book, and the book guides the reader from understanding that we are all worthy, we are all worth being loved, and we're all capable. And it walks the reader through the specific guide. There's 4 pillars throughout the book that, if you could imagine, if you could think of like a building. So if you think of your business as a building, a 3-story building with a basement, and the basement of that building would be belief. And so when you're able to build the unstoppable business mindset and you're able to believe in yourself, now you're ready to be able to take action in sales. And so, but without that belief, it's going to be really hard. So if you imagine that belief as the foundation, then on the first story of that building is going to be lead generation. And I walk the reader through, here's exactly how to get leads. Here's how to use social media. Here's how to use YouTube, step by step by step. Here's how to be able to do radio advertisement, networking, marketing. Here's how to be able to use Facebook, YouTube, whatever the case may be. I walk you through exactly how to be able to get business. And that would be the first level of business. And when you're able to believe in yourself, that's the foundation. And then the first story would be lead generation. And you're able to find business, then you're able to make some money and you're able to make an impact. Now, if you want to make more money and more impact, then you build a second story. The second story of that house would be building an organization. Because when you look, if you take lead generation, you put it into 3 categories: prospecting, marketing, networking. Prospecting costs you time. Marketing costs you money. Networking costs you money and time. Those are some assets that you have. So when you go to that first story of that lead generation, if you always want to sell and you always want it to rely on you and you never want to get any help, you're going to be limited off the asset of time, 24 hours a day. All right. And you're either going to have a limitation on how effective that you could be in sales, or you're never going to take a freaking day off.
Right.
So now the second story, if you want to actually start to scale, is about building your organization. So that's leverage and scale. And so the book walks you through, believe in yourself. Now here's exactly how you find business. Now here's exactly how you find the right support, the right systems, the right virtual assistants. Here's how you define who you are and who you want to attract to yourself to be able to help you, and to do so in an affordable way. And then lastly, so the bottom floor, the basement, would be belief, the build an unstoppable business mindset. The first floor would be lead generation. So we call that authority attraction. The second floor would be building organization. So we call that leverage and scale. The last story, the third story of the building, will be leadership. My definition of leadership is to be able to teach somebody how to think so that they can get what they want. So I give you in the book specific examples, specific frameworks, specific step-by-step of here's how you could be a more effective leader. Exactly, just like when I went through the self-coaching model before with a step-by-step. The entire book is a series of steps like that that's delivered in a narrative that I go through my story. And I start with, my childhood. I start with being on the floor, getting the shit knocked out of myself when I was 10 years old, trying to find my teeth. All right. So I start then, and I go through the entire journey all the way up until my age today.
Yeah, it's super powerful. Dan Rochon is our guest, and the book is Teach to Sell, published by Simon and Schuster. You can find it anywhere books are sold. Pre-order it now. Also, the website is nobrokemonths.com. This is to help realtors smooth out their business, increase their skill set, improve communication, and really learn how to deeply connect at a level that other agents aren't trained at, so that you can more effectively guide someone through these emotionally challenging home buying and selling decisions, as well as helping guide your business itself. So, and also realizing, as Dan said at the very, very beginning, the clock cycle in his metaphor with respect to how we sort of experience the world is, he's going to show you in this book how you can slow things down so that you can be more intentional about how you experience the world, so that you can set yourself up for more success. Dan, thank you so much for being on the show. Teach to Sell is the book. Simon and Schuster is the publisher. Find it on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. And pre-order it now. It is coming out next early next year. Is that correct, Dan?
Early next year. Yep. And if people want, I got a special gift. If you want to get on the list right now and actually get the book, be the first to get it, you can go to www.teachtosellbook.com. That's teachtosellbook.com. And I've got an electronic swag bag that'll give you a bunch of free goodies, some coaching, some guides in there, and some really cool resources that I'll give to you as a gift.
If you're a realtor and you are thinking about improving your communication skills, have you lost a deal where you just didn't find that you were connected to the client? Did you have a client that then dropped out because your communication wasn't to their liking? Dan's the guy to hire. Reach out to Dan. Nobrokemonths.com is where you can go to find him. And all things Dan are located there. Dan has been an agent, he's been an owner, he's an author. He will help you through and teach you specifically the most important skill around real estate, which is communication. Again, the idea that it's the one thing that AI can't solve for yet. AI can pretty much tell us everything else, all the information, the data that's out there, we could get it, right? AI is going to have that for us. What Dan's going to do is show you how to connect to other humans. That is never going to be um, in short supply and always in need. So, Dan, thank you so much. On behalf of our audience, I want to thank Dan for his time today. On behalf of Dan and myself, I want to thank the audience for making it to the end of the episode. We appreciate you. We appreciate our sponsors. And we encourage everybody to tell another realtor about this episode. Think of one other agent in your office that could benefit from hearing from this great conversation between Dan and myself around communication, and send them a link. You can find us anywhere podcasts are served. Also, leave us a review. Let us know what you think of the show. We read those and we take your comments very seriously and always try to improve. So, Dan, on behalf of everyone, thank you. And we will see everybody on the next episode.